Tamamdır. Başlayabiliyor muyuz?
Evet, başlayabilirsin.
Tamam. Selamlar, herkese iyi akşamlar diliyorum.
Hello and good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to commend the Turkish Medical Association for organizing this event. Since the very beginning of the pandemic, we have lost thousands of people in Turkey and all over the world. I would like to commemorate health officers who have lost their lives. The title of our session is The Invisibles in the Pandemic. We have listened to esteemed panelists who have made valuable presentations in the former session. If you had chance to listen to the former panelists, you had listened very good presentations. As for this session, we will focus on Turkey and their concerns for now and also the futures. I will make an opening speech first. As you know, in the beginning of pandemic, there was a perception that we were all in the same boat and the virus has the power to make everyone equal, and the outbreak is equalizing everyone. That was the discourse, and there was like a pastoral drawing and everyone was equal. That was the discourse. It was a common one, but we were aware of that was not the case, which have become visible and which has been proven because the pandemic hit those who are poor, those who are not equal. We will, of course, talk about inequalities in the course of our session because it is a virus of inequalities to some extent. Those who were made invisible, resulting from the prevailing system, the instant system, they have become visible. It is not about that they become visible in a positive sense. Although they have become visible, they are invisible. Because these invisibles are vulnerable and they have become more vulnerable. It's like Homo sapiens. So we are the bodies who are left aside and forced to be a naked body. So virus and infection might be democratic at first level, but the very existence of virus made clear that the virus creates inequalities because those who are not part of the ordinary structure of the society and categories are in fact left alone and die the death. And also the virus is a serious problem. My colleagues will talk about these issues in a detailed way. Those who are poor, refugees, LGBTI people, and also sex workers, and anyone who falls into this category. These are people who have been who have become more vulnerable, and moreover, As I said in the beginning, it's like a pastoral drawing and picture. There is also insensitivity. There was this discourse of solidarity, but that was not the case. I just want to give an example. I don't want to take too much of your long time. My example aims to give more details and shed light on this. Yıldız will talk about LGBTI and LGBT individuals and sex workers, and Hajar will talk about other poor segments of the society. I would like to talk about elderly people because the pandemic has shown us that elderly people are one of the most vulnerable groups. That is what we have experienced. Discrimination on the basis of age was a fact also in the past, but the pandemic has made it more visible because elderly people were asked to stay home as part of the lockdown measures. And as we have seen in other cases, elderly people were left alone and they suffered from die in these care services. As for Turkey, for example, we respect for elderly people, but that is not the case. If we pay attention to this older people, we can conclude that there was an attempt to label older people as the group which suppressed the virus. That was a pejorative term. There are numerous reasons, but maybe one of the key factors for this discrimination on the basis of age is being an old person is associated with death. And when you are an old person, there is no productivity in terms of economy, and there is no productivity in terms of society. You are not capable of regenerating, and that is the pandemic per se. So the pandemic is a phenomenon. Despite its destructive force and impact on the society, the decision makers aim to keep those who can work and who can regenerate the society at work. Of course, we need to pay attention to older people who are also poor. And I'm sure my colleague Hajar Fogo will talk about this issue. And since older people remind us of that constantly, so it is another form of discrimination on the basis of age. And pandemic has strengthened this concept. What I would like to say is that Özgür Arun, who is a professor, says, who is specialized in discrimination on the basis of age, he says there is a syndrome of Peter Pan. So there is a discourse that we will never be a society which is old, but we are already an old society with older people, so we should overcome this syndrome of Peter Pan. And we all know the management of the outbreak and also the political management of the outbreak. And if we create a new way of managing the pandemic, then we can improve the relations and ties between these disadvantaged groups and these segments of poor. I don't want to take too much of your time, so I would like to give floor to Hajar Fogo. You have 20 minutes. She is from the network of the Poverty.
Merhaba.
Hello everyone.
Çok teşekkürler.
Thank you
buraya davet ettiğiniz için ve Remzi Bey çok
for your kind invitation.
Çok güzel değerlendirdiniz gerçekten.
presented a
Ya
very
ben de
good
mesela uzun
framework.
zamandır yoksulluk çalışıyorum.
I
Tam
have
bu
been working
kırılgan
in this
gruplarla çalışıyorum ama
poverty issues
gerçekten
for
tam da
a
dediğiniz
long
gibi
period, but as you rightly
pandemide
stated,
bambaşka bir
the
fotoğrafla aslında
pandemic
karşılaştık ve
has presented a
gerçekten bir
totally
sürü
different
aslında
picture.
o biraz önce bahsettiğiniz o yaşlılardan alınan o her şeyin
We,
böyle terse
as you
çevrildiği bir
talked about,
dönemdi ve gerçekten de bu
this
kırılgan
older
grupların,
people,
görünmeyen
everything
grupların
has been
ne kadar
reversed
yalnız bırakıldığını da
and
aslında tek
people
başlarına
were left alone.
bırakıldıklarına da aslında tanık olduk hep beraber. Biz uzun yıllardır yoksul mahallelerde çalışıyoruz
We
ama
have been working
bir
in poor
yani
neighborhoods
bizim
for
yaptığımız şey aslında işte
a long
çocukların
period.
okul
What we
devamsızlığını
do is
önlemek aslında
about
bütün sivil toplum örgütlerin gibi yani
prevention
belli
of
şeyler yapıyorsun işte kadınların kapasitelerini
school
geliştirmek gibi işte
drops
yaşlılarla
and
ilgili başka
also
şeyler
building
yapmak gibi ama
capacity
pandemi döneminde her şey
of
tam tersine
women. But
çevrildi.
in the
Çünkü
pandemic,
tamamen
everything
geriye döndü.
has
Çünkü
been
insanlar artık
reversed.
en temel ihtiyaçlarına
Now we
ulaşamayacak
are
hale geldiler. Yani işte
in the square number
gıdaya
one because
erişememe,
people have
fatura
no
ödeyememe,
access
kirasını
to
ödeyememe gibi.
basic
Ve
needs like
tam işte bu 11
access to food,
Mart'ta evde kal süreci başladığı zaman
paying bills. When
işte
the
biraz önce de
lockdown
bahsettiğimiz
was
gibi sanki böyle bir
introduced
eşitlik işte herkes
on
aynı
11th
odada
of
değil,
March
aynı
and
odadaymış gibi
when
ama
people were
herkesin
asked to
aslında
stay home,
o odanın nasıl bir eşitsizlik içerisinde
there was
olduğunu
a
gösterdi
perception that
aslında
everyone was equal, but
pandemi.
that
Ve
is not the case,
18
and the
aslında
pandemic
bir
has
de
made it
şu yani o
clear.
dönemde kullanılan
In
bütün
this period,
kavramların da hiçbir öneminin olmadığı da çıktı ortaya. O sosyal
it
mesafe,
has become
işte
obvious that
65 artı
none of
yaş,
these
işte
terms
evde
like
kal,
social distance
işte biz
and
sizin için alışveriş
people who
yaparız
are
gibi
older
şeyler
than 65
bu derin
should stay
yoksulluk
home
yaşayan
are
insanlar için,
meaningless. And
gruplar için, aileler
you
için
will stay
hiçbir
home and
anlam
we will
ifade etmiyordu maalesef.
provide you the needs
18
that
Mart
you have.
gibi biz ailelerle dayanışmaya başladık.
We
Çünkü
began
11 Mart'tan hemen birkaç gün sonra
our solidarity
bizim çalışma
activities
yaptığımız,
as of 18th of
sahada
March,
çalışma yaptığımız aileler bizi aramaya
and
başladılar ve
we received
işte
phone calls
evde
from the
gıda yok,
families whom we are working together
bebek
on the
varsa bezi
ground,
yok, mamaya
and
ulaşamıyoruz
they
falan
said
gibi.
we have no
İşte
food
dışarıda
and there is
çıkamadığımız
no
için bir kampanya başlattık. Evden değiştir kampanyası. Ve bizim ilk destekçilerimizden biridir Şebnem
food
Hoca da.
or other materials at home,
Ve bugüne kadar da
even for babies. And
1500
Şebnem Hoca is one of
üzerinde
our
aileye
first
gıda erişimi
supporters.
yaptık
So
ama
far
sadece
we
gıda değil işte
provided
tablet
food
gibi,
and
soba gibi
other
falan
types of
ihtiyaçlar.
humanitarian
Ama burada
aid to
gerçekten hani inanılmaz
1,500
hani
families.
ben de gerçekten çok böyle çok yani bu derece bir
Of
açlık, bu
course,
derece bir yokluk aslında
I
beklemiyordum.
didn't expect to
Çünkü
see
bizim işte derin yoksulluk
a-
dediğimiz şey aslında çocuklarına da
an issue of
bırakılan
poverty
şeyin
at
nesilden
this
nesile devam
level,
eden bir
because
yoksulluk
this
anlamına geliyor. Günlük çalışan
poverty
insanlar,
means
kağıt toplayıcıları, inşaat
it is a
işçileri,
cross-generational issue.
tekstil
People work on a
işçileri,
daily
hiçbir
basis
sosyal
for
güvencesi olmayan işte
those who work in textile
müzisyenler,
sector,
komiler,
those who are
garsonlar
working as
gibi
waiters or
ailelerle biz
musicians who have no
çalışmaya
job
başladık ve
security.
bu
And
insanlar
these
o
are
eve
the types of
döndükleri
families whom
süre
we began
içerisinde
working.
maalesef ki bankada bir paraları yok,
Unfortunately,
birikmiş hiçbir
since they
şeyleri
had
yok.
no
Buzluklarında
savings in
çünkü o
banks
dönemde
and,
işte bir gazeteci demişti bize Türk toplumunda işte herkesin
for example,
mutlaka
at the
buzluğunda
time
yiyecek
one of
vardır
the
gibi. Buzlukları da
journalists
olmayan
said
yani işte
there are
hemen
foods
birkaç gün sonra
in
evde makarnanın dahi
refrigerators
kalmadığı ailelerdi.
in
Ve
our
gerçekten
society,
de
but
bu
that is not the
dönemde kamu
case. And
kurumları çok iyi
after a
bir
few
imkan
days,
vermedi.
people had
Ee,
nothing,
Yani yani işte
had
o
no food
klasik
at home.
koliler o da neredeyse birkaç ay sonra o
So
klasik koliler evlere gitmeye başladı ve
we
o
began
evde bir
send
bebeğin olduğu, o evde bir
food
yatalak
packages
bir
were sent
yaşlının
to
olduğu maalesef göz önüne
houses
alınmadı. Ve
after
biz
several months.
ailelerle görüşmeye başladığımız zaman işte
When
oradaki
we began talking to
ihtiyacı bir
families,
koli, o işte
I can't hear the speaker.
Yani orada bir kadının işte pedini, orada işte bir bebek varsa işte onun kaç
And if
numaralı
there is
bez kullandığını ve
baby
o
at
dönemde
home,
gerçekten inanılmaz dayanışma gösterdi insanlarda
napkins
ve
and
biz bunu
diapers
şu
are
anda da zaten
important,
devam
and
devam
also
ediyoruz. Ve bu dışarı çıkmaya başladıktan sonra da
sanitary
sahada
napkin for
ailelerle
women are
görüşmeye başladık
important.
ve bir
And
araştırma
we
yaptık.
began
103
talking to
haneyle
families. We
görüştük.
carried out a survey, and in this respect, we
Aileler,
talked to
yani görüştüğümüz 103
103
tanenin
families,
aylık geliri
and
işte
the
kağıt
income
toplayıcıları ve işte
of
çiçekçiler, işte seyyar satıcılar günlük
these
aslında
families
işte ortalama 700-800 TL
is
ile
about
geçinen insanlar.
700-800 per month.
Yetişkinlerin %18'i düzenli bir
And
işe sahipken
18% of
%64'ü bunların günlük işlerle çalışıyor. %18'i ise hiçbir
adults
işte
had
çalışmıyor.
daily
103
jobs,
haneden
and
%58'inin
60%
eşler ve
had no job,
çocuklardan
and
oluşuyor. %17'si tek ebeveynli çocuklardan oluşuyor. Bu aynı
17%
zamanda
of them had
özellikle yalnız
only
annelerin
one kid, and especially for single
yani
mothers
onların da yoksulluk açısından ne kadar eşitsiz bir durumda olduğunu da
are
aslında gösteren
in a position
bir şeydi. İşte bir taraftan
which makes the inequalities more
çocuğuna bakma, bir taraftan işte
serious,
evde gıdaya
while she
ulaşma,
has
bir
to take
taraftan
care of
faturasını ödemek için
kids,
çalışma,
and
işte
she
kağıt
has to work
toplayıcıysa
to
o
pay the
çocukla
bills, and
birlikte
if
ama
she
çocuğunu
collects
evde
papers
bırakabileceği
and
kimse yok,
bins,
çocuğun dışarı
there
çıkması
is no
yasak
one
falan ve inanılmaz
to leave the
olaylar. Biraz
kid
önce
at
sizin de
home.
bahsettiğiniz bu
As
mesela
you
65 artı
stated, for example, people who are
ben hiç unutmuyorum
over 65,
böyle bir çift
I
kağıt toplayıcı bir çiftle
always
görüştüm
remember
65 artı ve
I
30.
talked to
günde bana ulaşmışlardı. Daha önce de bunu birkaç kez anlattım. Dedim ki yani ne yediniz, ne içtiniz, ne yaptınız yani bu süre içerisinde dışarıda çıkmıyorsunuz falan. Bakkala yazdırdık demişti. Sonra ben o bakkalla konuşmak istedim. Yakında olduğu için telefonla görüştüm ve o 30 günlük süre içerisinde 170 TL borç yapmışlar mesela ve o dönemi böyle geçirmek zorunda kalmışlar. O yüzden hani bu işte 65 artı evde kal. Ondan sonra siz bize telefon edin ve biz sizin için alışveriş yaparız. Para yoksa tabii ki alışveriş aslında yapmanızın da imkanı yok. Yine bu dönemde çocukların ev geçindirdiğine tanık olduk. Yani %6 çocuklar bu dönemde çalışmaya başlamışlar. Özellikle bunlar yalnız o dediğim ebeveynlerde çocuklar o 1 ile 4 arası bile dışarı çıkıp kağıt toplayıp ya da ne bileyim bir markete gidiyorlar işte oranın temizliğini falan yapıyorlar. Tabii ki bu aynı zamanda onların eğitime de katılamama durumunu da gösteriyor. Ama eğitime katılamama çünkü aynı zamanda o evde internet yok. Aynı zamanda o evde tablet yok. Hatta akıllı telefon dahi maalesef yok. Mesela yine %74 bebek bezi ve mamaya ulaşamayan anneler vardı ve işte bez alamadığı için işte poşet bağlayan anneler, işte çocuğuna mama alamadığı için şekerli sütle devam eden ama bu sorun maalesef bitmiş değil. Bu sorun devam ediyor. Çünkü bu yine her zaman söylediğim gibi tekrar söylüyorum. Bu alarmlı mamalar aslında pandeminin fotoğrafıdır. Yani bir bebek mamasında siz bir işte alarm görüyorsanız yani durumun ne kadar vahim olduğunun, yoksulluğun ne kadar derinleştiğinin bir göstergesi ama bu fotoğraf aynı zamanda bebeğine mama alamayan annelerin de psikolojik olarak da çöktüğünün fotoğrafıdır aslında. Yani. Ve şu anda da mama alamadıkları gibi işte yani işte 3 aylık, işte 6 aylık bebeklere aslında işte süt içirmeleri gerekirken daha ucuz olduğu için kullanan anneler var. Yoğurt yedirmeye çalışan anneler var. Hazır çorba yedirmeye
Mothers have
çalışan
to
anneler
use
var.
yogurt. You have
Yine
to feed them
bir
with
sürü
milk
ailenin
or
elektriği
uh,
kesik durumda. Yine o dönemde biraz
some
önce sizin de
instant
bahsettiğiniz gibi işte o
soup
birkaç ay
varieties.
dönemde işte
And
elektrik faturalarınızı
during the
elektriğinizi
lockdowns,
kesmeyeceğiz, iki ay fatura
people were promised
e,
that there would
gelmeyecek.
not
Yani
be any
o dönemde
electricity
gelmeyen
cuts
fatura
or they would
sonuçta
not
3.
receive
ayda 3
any
fatura
electricity
olarak geldi.
bills. Of course, they did not receive
Doğalgaz
any
4
bills
fatura
during the
olarak geldi falan. Hani
during the
kiralar
lockdown, but
ödenmediği
later
için
on,
diyelim ki o
after
dönemde. Sonra 3
the end
kira
of that
olarak geldi.
period, they had to pay
Ve
3 bills at
gerçekten
once.
o dışarıya
The same is
çıktıktan
also true
sonra
for the
aslında
rents
daha
that these
da
people are paying.
yoksullaşmaya
So
başladılar.
the
Çünkü
moment
işte
they
bir
stepped
sürü ailenin
outside, they felt that
elektriği
they
kesik
were
durumdaydı.
getting poorer. And already in
Mesela
many
bir
of the
sürü
homes, in
bebekte
many of
de
the
maalesef
households,
bu
there was no electricity.
astım, koa
And we
hastası
know that
gibi mesela bir sürü bebek hava makinesi
many
kullanıyor.
of the
Bilmiyorum o dönemle de mi
babies
ilgili? Daha önce yani
have
yaşadıkları
asthma.
koşullarla ilgili
I
evet
do not
biliyorum
know
ama o
whether this
dönemde
could
de
be
ortaya
explained
çıkan
with the lockdown period. However, during that
hastalıklar da
time
oldu
frame,
maalesef.
some new diseases were
İyi
starting to be seen
beslenmediği için
as the
sütü
babies
kesilen
or the children
anneler
were not properly fed, or as the mothers
o
were
dönemde
not properly fed,
yine doğan
they were not able to
bebeklerde
breastfeed
işte
their children.
yani
And
bütün bunlar
also,
annelerin anlatımları ve ev
based on
ziyaretlerinden
the accounts of the
söylüyorum. Hani
mothers that we
bir
have
tıpla ilişkim
collected
yok.
during the house
Ama
visits,
o dönemde işte doğan
the
çocukların hepsinde
newborns
mutlaka bir
in
uzun
that
süre
period
hastanede kalıyorlar, yoğun
had to
bakımda
stay
kalıyorlar. Çok zayıf
in the intensive
doğuyorlar.
care units for quite a
Yetersiz
long time
beslenmeden
period, as they
kaynaklı
were
ve hemen hemen
malnourished. They
hepsinde
have to
benim
stay
tanık
there for
olduğum
long periods,
solunumla
and in all
ilgili
of these cases, they had
problemleri var.
respiratory problems.
Şeylerin yetersiz beslenmeden kaynaklı ya da o evdeki
And this
koşullardan
could be due to either
kaynaklı.
malnutrition or
Yine görüşme
due to
yaptığımız ailelerden
insufficient or dire
%84'ü
conditions
yeterli
at home.
miktarda besine
Now,
ulaşamadığını
84% of the
söylüyor.
households
%7'si
claim that they do not
ulaşabildiğini
have access to
söylüyor.
sufficient level of
Sadece bizim
nutrition.
desteğimizle
7% say that they
de
have enough food. And
bütün o dönemi
there were some
geçiren
households
ailelere de
that we have
maalesef
provided support, and the only
tanık
support they
olduk. Yine bu
received
dönemde
was the one coming from us.
özellikle
We had seen that
marketlerin
there were such
önlerinde
households. And
atılan
during the
yiyecekleri
same time, these people
toplayan
also started to
ailelerin
collect
sayısının çoğaldığını
leftovers
görüyoruz.
or food thrown
Pazarlardaki
out of the
artıkları toplayan aile sayısı maalesef çoğaldı.
supermarkets because of the
Yine
expiry date. So we have seen such instances
%67'sinde
increased.
mutlaka bir kronik
And
hastalık var.
of this population,
bunların
67%
%29'u biraz
have
önce bahsettiğim
chronic
gibi
diseases.
çocuklar
And most
oluşturuyor.
are children,
Yine
of
dediğim gibi
course.
gerçekten hani eğitimde neredeyse
Like I
%80'i
said again,
bu dönemde internete erişemedi. Yani biz bununla da ilgili
in terms of
destekte
education,
bulunduk.
these
Sonrası çok yakın
children did
zamanda
not
Milli
have
Eğitim
access to
Bakanlığı
education
tablet
because
falan
they did not have any internet.
dağıttı ama
Only recently the Ministry of National
önümüzdeki dönem
Education started distributing
gerçekten
some
büyük bir önlem
tablets for
alınması
these
bir sürü
children.
çocuğun okulu bırakacağını
However,
ve
in the
çalışmaya
near
başlayacağını
future,
maalesef
we
görüyorum.
expect
Bu da
that many
şu
of these
demektir
children
ki
will
bu
be
yeni
dropouts
yoksulluk,
and
işte
will
bu
begin to
devredilen miras olarak nesilden
work. So
nesile
this is a new poverty, and
süre
this is an
gelen yoksulluğunda
intergenerational
devam edileceği
poverty.
anlamına
And
geliyor.
all of these
Sürem
clues
doldu
tell
mu
us
bilmiyorum
that
ama
this will continue as well. I don't know if my time is up.
devam ediyor.
Devam edebilirsiniz.
Yes,
Tamam.
you may continue.
Yine %56'sı soba kullanıyor, %25'i
And
doğalgaz ve
56%
%15'i
of these
işte
people
elektrikli
use all
ısıtıcı.
type of
Diğerleri ise
stoves, and the
dışarıdan
others
topladıkları
use
işte
electrical heating
çırpılarla
devices,
ısınmaya
and certain others try
çalışıyorlar.
to
Yani
collect
ısınma da
wood,
çok
and
büyük
that's
bir
how they try to heat their homes.
problem. Çünkü
And
odun da
heating is a major issue because
alamıyorlar
these
ya da
people cannot
işte yerel yönetimlerin
afford
mesela
buying
verdiği
any wood.
kömürlerde maalesef yanmıyor.
For
Yani bunu
example, some local
abartmıyorum.
municipalities,
Her
local
mahallede
governments
de
have been
böyle bir
distributing coal, but
sorun
those
maalesef
are,
var.
I mean, the coal doesn't have the necessary
Yine
quality,
kadınların
so it's not easy to use
%47'sinin kadın
all that is
pedine
distributed.
ulaşamadığını
And 47% of the women do not have access to panty liners, according to
Yine
our study.
görüşme yaptığımız 103 haneden 49'u
Out of the
bebek bezi ya da
103
maması kullanıyor ve bu
households,
ailelerin
49
%74'ü
need
bez ve mama
diapers
almakta
or baby
zorlandığını
food, and
söyledi.
they
%21'i hiç alamadığını
they find
ifade
it very difficult to
etti.
buy these, and 21% cannot afford
%87'si destekler olmasa hiç
these at all.
erişemeyeceğini
And
söyledi.
80% say that if there had not
Yine bu
been any
dönemde
support, then they would not have access to
annelerde
these
işte bu özellikle
products.
çocuklarla ilgili yani çocukların gıdaya erişememesi gibi sorunlardan psikolojik
And mothers undergo
desteğe ihtiyaç
psychological
olduklarını ifade ettiler
problems.
bizlere.
They
Ama
need
hani
psychological
bununla da
support
ilgili
because they cannot
bir
bear
yani
witnessing
doktora ya da bununla ilgili bir tedavi
their
sürecine
children's
girmiyorlar.
lack of
Çünkü
access to food. But of
o
course they
kadar
cannot
çok
go
bu
to
temel
doctors as
ihtiyaçlara
well because
kitlenmiş
they are
durumdalar
all
ki hani bu tür
busy
destekler
at
hani lüks
trying
haline
to
gelmiş ve bununla ilgili
solve
zaten
the
bir
issues related to basic
olanakları
items.
maalesef
Of course, they cannot afford
yok.
going to the doctors
Yani biz
for
aynı
psychological
zamanda
support.
derin yoksulluk ağı olarak bütün bu
As the
bilgileri,
Deep
işte
Poverty
bu yaptığımız
Network,
bütün
we
bu
are trying
araştırmaları
to
aslında kamu
collect
kurumlarına,
this
çalışma
data.
yaptığımız
We are
ilçe
carrying out some
belediyelerine
studies and
hepsine
we are submitting the
göndermiş durumdayız. Ama
outputs
aynı
to the
zamanda
local municipalities, to the relevant
pandemi
local bodies,
ile birlikte
governmental bodies,
yoksulluğun, bu derin
and we
yoksulluğun
have seen that
yeniden masaya
with the
yatırılması, yeniden
pandemic,
tartışılması
deep
gerektiğini,
poverty has become an
belki
issue that
işte bu kamu
needs to be
kurumlarının önlerindeki o
revisited and
sosyal
rediscussed.
hizmet mevzuatının ya da sosyal yardımlar
Perhaps the social
denilen şeyin
aid
mevzuatının
legislation
yeniden masaya yatırılması
needs to be
gerektiğini, her şeyin
revived. It
çok
has to be put on the
değiştiğini,
table because a
pandemi
lot of
öncesi
things
ve
have
pandemi
changed. Now
sonrası
the pre-pandemic
yeniden
and
her şeyi
post-pandemic
tartışmak
periods, everything needs
gerektiğini
to
ve
be rediscussed. This is
yoksulluğa da
one
çok
of our
boyutlu
major
bakmak
findings,
gerektiğini.
and we
Yani
have
bir
to have
hanenin
a
içerisinde 5 kişilik bir hane ise o 5
multi-layered
kişi içerisindeki eşitsizliğe de
examination of
bakılması gerektiğini.
poverty.
Yani
I
orada
mean, if in a
otizmli bir çocuk
household
var
there
mı,
are
orada engelli
5
bir çocuk var mı, bir
individuals,
yaşlı
then
var
we
mı,
have
bir
to
yatalık var
take a
mı,
look at different
yalnız bir
categories,
kadın
whether
var mı
there is any
gibi
disabled
ve bütün
person,
bu
whether there is a
buna göre
single
bir
mother,
politika
whether there are
oluşturulması gerektiğini.
children
Yani
with
orada
certain
işte ne bileyim
ailments. So all
bodul
of
bir
these need
çocuk
to be
var mı,
considered,
yetersiz
and the
beslenmeden mi
policies should be
kaynaklı bu
able to
durum, erken ölen
accommodate
biri
all
var
of
mı
these
gibi
needs. We have to learn,
soruların
for example,
daha çok
whether there
sorulması
is
gerektiğini
there have been
ve
any
ancak
family
ve ancak
members who
böyle
have died
yoksulluğun
early. So only
azaltacağını
if we
düşünüyorum.
can study those details, then we
Teşekkür
will have the chance to reduce poverty. Thank you.
Biz de Hacer Boyar sunum için çok
Thank you very much, Hajar, for this presentation. Of course, there are individuals who do not have access to basic needs, basic healthcare, basic food. So all of these are very difficult issues. And throughout the pandemic, for example, abiding by the hygiene measures, I mean, washing your hand with soap, buying disinfectants, or buying the masks. As you know, initially the masks were in black market. So these were also inaccessible. So these individuals are really experiencing the deep poverty in their cells. And Hajar Foucault told us one more thing about this subject matter. We cannot say that there is a single category of the poor. We have to understand that poverty is an intersectional issue, is an intersectional dynamic, cross-cutting the children's group, the elderly group, the group of older people. So I think Hajar gave us a lot of food for thought, and Yıldız will be talking about similar subjects as well. The poverty of the sex workers, the poverty of the LGBTI plus individuals. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Yıldız Star. You have 20 minutes, Yıldız. At the beginning of the session, Remzi asked a question whether we are on the same boat. Now, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had started using this boat metaphor. We were just discussing whether this is a large boat or a small boat. I always remember Titanic when we start these discussions. As you know, Titanic was racing towards an iceberg, and meanwhile, we are at the same time watching in the movie a heterosexual romance. And but of course, we were only looking at the rich people on the boat. And the boat at one point hits the iceberg, and the poor living at the bottom part of the ship had already died. But our camera is still on the people who are on the upper decks, and we are wondering whether they will meet or not. So pandemic is giving us the same picture. So we are again watching a heterosexual romance. The camera is never showing us what is happening at the lower decks, and LGBTI plus are among those who are in those lower decks, and they are in a very fragile position. And this is, of course, not specific to the pandemic. Since 2015, we know that the government has been working very hard to target the LGBTI plus individuals. In a country where they have the minimum rights, the government's responsibility should be providing access to the rights. However, in our country, we have experienced completely the opposite. We only see, for example, what is happening at the level of the state, at the level of the government, and we see a redesigning exercise. So we know that there had been bans in the protests in Ankara. For example, there was a unlimited ban for the LGBTI demonstrations, and there had been discussions about withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention, and the government is still continuing with these policies. This enmity against the LGBTI was continuing, and right in the middle of all these things, we have started to encounter the COVID-19 pandemic, and things speeded up. I'd like to give you some examples from the statements of some governmental bodies. I would like to talk about their discriminatory approaches against the LGBTI+. Now, in the first days of the pandemic, the Ministry of National Education banned the drawings, the rainbow drawings by children. And all of a sudden, a conspiracy theory was developed, and they said that these pictures, these drawings by children are promoting the LGBTI. A similar thing happened to the broadcasts on Netflix. A character was described as a gay person, and I watched that TV series, and this character called Osman was not gay. I mean, and we were trying to understand whether he was gay or not, and the TV series was censored. We know that the Department of Religious Affairs, they also condemned the LGBTI individuals and those adulterers. So in the eyes of the government, during the fight against pandemic, of course, all of these had implications on the shaping of the healthcare periods. June, on the other hand, is an interesting time period. June is usually the time where the LGBTI communities have been targeted in the last couple of years. And again, we experienced that in June last year. And the Ministry of Interior, the communications presidency of the President's Office, they also targeted LGBTI, and they discriminated against the LGBTI. They tried to counter the LGBTI community with the family, and with the discussions on the Istanbul Convention, these debates were heated up. And also it was claimed that the LGBTI plus community movement was in fact a conspiracy against the government, against the nation, and these people are funded from abroad. And also, you know, very recently the Human Rights Action Plan was announced. Very interestingly, that exercise was also financed by the EU money. So that's very interesting. They have double standards. And So while all of these things were happening in the public sector, on the government side, what is happening in the opposition on the side of the political parties and the professional organizations? As you know, on the online shops, some articles were prevented from being sold. What are these? For example, this cup, because it has a rainbow emblem on it. A t-shirt which reads, "Love will win." So if there is any rainbow on a product, then the Ministry of Commerce prohibits it from being sold. And this was the decision of the advertisement board of the Ministry of Commerce, and unfortunately on this board there are representatives from the Turkish Medical Association, from the Turkish Union of Bar Associations, and it was said that this decision was taken unanimously. Right after that, the Turkish Medical Association said that we were not thinking that they would be using this decision to ban all those products. But it was a small excuse, let's say, and very recently there was a question asked by a CHP deputy, and the board explained that it was taken unanimously as a decision and there was no discrimination against the LGBTI+, and under the pretext of protecting children, in fact, here we see that they are introducing new values. I mean, I'm drinking water just like everybody else. The cup only has a rainbow. So do you think that this is really harmful for children? Perhaps this was a mistake. Perhaps this was a mistake that was not understood. But I think we have to understand that the government has got all this intelligence, all this information about LGBTI. However, TTB or the other professional bodies, they don't have any experience about the discrimination against the LGBTI. So, I mean, if we are very optimistic, this is the only interpretation that we can come up with. Kaos GL, for example, was Kaos GL periodical was initially collected because it was not proper for all groups. It was found obscene. Now, Umut Güner was tried for many years for publishing that periodical. So, LGBTI community has been described as an obscene group for many years. And when you talk to different institutions, this is one of the first words uttered by these institutions when you ask them to present their opinion about LGBTI individuals. So we know that the government has mobilized all institutions. So if we're faced with this, then we definitely need all the critical organizations to have a similar counter policy. So all these different professional bodies should have a strong LGBTI policy in the heart of their overall policies. So LGBTI people are not welcomed anywhere, but in fact, LGBTI plus should be in all parts of the home here defined as our country. Now, this is how the LGBTI individuals are being targeted. And why are we discussing about this in the middle of the pandemic? I'd like to say a few words on this. For the LGBTI individuals, even pandemic has become a luxury. I mean, we cannot think about it because as a member of the LGBTI community, I have to admit that I cannot even worry about the COVID-19. I know that LGBTI individuals are being attacked. A very recent case was the murder of a trans woman and an attack against a Syrian refugee who was LGBTI. So there are some studies. In fact, 2 studies. Young LGBTI Plus Association published a study in September. This study is called The Situation of the LGBTI Community in the COVID-19 period. 252 people participated in this study, and 15% of these claim that they do not have any health insurance. 23 say that they started having problems in accessing medicine and treatment. For example, their appointments with the psychiatric hospitals are postponed, and also people who are in the transition stage, for the trans individuals, they do not have access to a full treatment. And 185 of the participants say that they are being isolated. Online activities or events are not sufficient to socialize, and they are faced with domestic violence, sexual violence, psychological violence, and other types of violence. So these are the findings of a study published in September. There is another study, Spot prepared this. Approximately 1,000 people participated from all around the country, and there are some very important findings of this second study about poverty as well. The respondents were asked about their sources of income during the pandemic, and 458 of the LGBTI individuals say that they did not have any incomes during the pandemic. So in a study with over 800 respondents, give us some information about the larger population, of course. And these people are asked whether they were in contact with LGBTI associations, and many said that they did not have any links or relations with the LGBTI associations. And this means that they do not have any income. And some say that they have a monthly income varying between 200 to 1,000 liras. 77 say that they earn between 2,000 and 2,500 liras. So this is in fact telling us how the COVID-19 process is experienced by these individuals. And in this study, on the other hand, we have the following key findings. So they do not have any information as to where to apply to, and also even if they can have access to certain healthcare institutions, they fear that they will be discriminated because of their orientation, and that's why they prefer to ask for help from their friends. And this is also a very important finding. Apart from this, there are people who are faced with violence, and they do not have access to any public entities for complaint.
And public institutes do not provide services to LGBTI people, and they are not able to benefit from social aids. And these data show that even though there is no pandemic, these LGBTI people have certain difficulties, and these data show that it is right, and it is in parallel with the period before the pandemic. And when they apply to job, they face these type of problems, and usually they are excluded from employment. Those who have chance to access to a job, they usually hide their identity. the interpreters ask me to speak slowly. Sometimes I speak fast. They can work providing that they hide their identity. Majority of them hide their identity, but even though they hide this identity, they still face discrimination. Another important data is that I always try to explain this situation, and in order to know it, you just need to look at around yourself. For example, when we carried out our research about the employment, most of the respondents whom we told say they are not members of chambers, and most of these chambers do not want them to recruit, and there are only a few cases which cannot constitute this data. And it also shows that chambers and also trade unions and other organizations should be more sensitive to freedom of association for these people. It should be the key issue for these people because they face discrimination. And to me, it is very disappointing that other than trade unions and chambers, the main demands are related to change in the legislation, and LGBTI issues are recognized. To me, it is very disappointing for the trade unions because these are key issues for trade unions, and they should be the main actor for raising such demands for change in the professional life. And there is a low level of confidence towards these organizations, and the respondents' reply also showed that it is true. And regarding the hate crime, are not secrets and are not happening in private spaces. Many of them are occurring in public spaces, and there are witnesses, but usually these witnesses prefer not to intervene in it. And when we look at the perpetrators, in most of the cases, there are more than 2 perpetrators. That amounts to organized lynch cases. And of course, there are very limited data since the security department does not register such cases. But even though there are a few resources, we see that there is impunity in most of the cases, and these hate crimes demonstrate that these people face discrimination at hospitals as well, which is important from my perspective because hate crimes occur in a consecutive way. You face violence or crime first, and then you face discrimination at hospital, or you feel and you think about what may happen to you at hospital, whether my statement will be taken or what will be the investigation, and if there is a court case, what will be the attitude from the judge, or what will be the prosecutor's position, and whether these perpetrators will be arrested or not. In this week, we had 2 cases which we reported. One of them is about a trans woman. She was subjected to a sexual attack, and on 2nd of March, the perpetrator was arrested and he survived, and on 3rd of March, the perpetrator was released. When I talked to the victim was saying that I can't sleep because I am afraid that he may intrude into my house. And Asya is a trans woman. She is receiving treatment because she was attacked with nitric acid and her face was deformed, and her friends go to hospital every day and they say security officers' attitude are rude and not polite to us, and rather than for medical purposes, we are focusing on this type of issues. And I have been working in media reports since 2013, and there is no single case of hate crime that hospital process goes smoothly. In all cases, people say they face problems at hospitals. And in the case of hate crimes, there should be no problem with access to health services and treatment. And my last point is, I don't want to take too much of your time, my last point is, in this atmosphere where we face, to some extent, a state policy, and it is not only for solidarity for LGBTI issue, it is not something that we see as an outer aspects, and we are talking about a group of people whom we are responsible within the scope of right to health, and we should act together for minimum democratic and human rights, and LGBTI rights and freedoms should be at the center, because it is at the these rights and freedoms are at the center of government. That means political parties, human rights organizations, professional chambers should also pay attention to these issues at the highest level. And there is need for activity, and I respect a lot for you, but being inactive in this sense makes me disappointed to some extent. Yes, I would like to thank Yıldıztar for their comprehensive presentation. He reminded us of what the LGBTI individuals experienced during the last year. Of course, LGBTI plus individuals are the most marginalized groups who have been excluded from the society by these actors. So these are unfortunately the groups which we remember at the latest stage. And while we are, of course, it is more difficult to face fight against this form of discrimination comparing to heteronormative issues. And I'm sure maybe Şebnem Hoca would like to answer to respond to the criticism from Yıldız, and we may not be aware of this fact. On the other hand, the Turkish Medical Association and also the Chamber of Medicine in Ankara, I think that they are really good at fighting against homophobia and heterosexism, and they are standing with the LGBTI movement, and they are subjects that are standing with the LGBTI movement, and these are important democratic organizations, democratic civil society organizations, and as an activist of LGBTI plus individual. Of course, Yıldız also made a comprehensive presentation. I just want to give an example. For example, trans sex workers. Of course, it is applicable to all it's applicable to all sex workers, but as for the trans sex women workers, there is pandemic, and then we are asked to stay home, and when you have sex with someone, it is highly possible that you might be infected, but this is the way how you live. This is your living conditions, and your life depends on this type of lifestyle. So you choose alternatives among that option. So if you have sex with someone, then you might be infected, but if you have no sex with someone, then you will not be able to survive. So as Hacer Foucault stated, it is related to deep poverty. It is one of the key indicators of deep poverty. Of course, LGBTI plus individuals have difficulties in access to right to health, and it is always challenging, and access to health services, especially under the pandemic, are very important and have become worsened. And there is a question from Ali Karakoç. It goes to Hacer Fogo. The question is, where are the families based? The families whom you
Pandeminin
met,
başladığı
where are they
dönemlerde yani
based?
İstanbul
In the first period
yoğunlukluydu
of
ama
pandemic, it
yani
was
işte
of course
Diyarbakır'dan Van'a,
concentrated
İzmir'de, Ankara'ya kadar
on
destek verdiğimiz
Istanbul, but
aileler
of course there
oldu.
were families whom
Ama
we
şu anda
supported
yoğunluklu
in
olarak
Diyarbakır and
İstanbul'da
in other
çalışıyoruz.
areas, but we focus on
Çünkü
Istanbul
yetişmek
mainly
mümkün değil
because
aslında.
it
Biraz
is
şeyden
not
söz etmedim hani
possible to
dayanışma
provide
ağından ama
these
durum her yerde aynı yani.
support
Mesela
to
işte
everyone. Of course,
İzmir'deki
the situation
arkadaşlarla
is
da haberleşiyorum.
same. We are in continuous contact with our colleagues
Oradaki
in
dayanışma
Izmir,
gruplarıyla da
and there are
haberleşiyorum. Çok
solidarity
vahim ve
groups in Izmir.
yani Tekirdağ'da da
It
öyle,
is
Ankara'da da öyle.
extremely worrying
Yani bu
in
günlük
Tekirdağ,
güvencesiz
in Ankara,
dediğimiz gruplar özellikle
because
yani
especially
hayatını
the groups
sokaktan,
we call
geçimini sokaktan
with no
sağlayan
job security.
özellikle
They
bu
have to
aileler
work on a
gittikçe
daily
bu
basis,
derin yoksulluk
and this
derinleşiyor.
deep
Daha fazla derinleşiyor.
poverty
Ama
gets
tabii ki bir
deeper
de işte bu dönemde işinden
under these
olanlar, yeni
circumstances.
yoksullar var.
There
Hayatı
are people
boyunca
who have
hiç
lost their
sosyal yardım
jobs.
almamış insanlar var.
There
Ama
are
şu anda
people
onlar
who
da
have not
maalesef gıdaya
received any
erişemeyecek
social
durumdalar.
aid
Yeni
throughout their
yoksullar
lives, but
dediğimiz
now they
aileler. Aslında
began
hepimiz aslında
receiving these
yoksullaştık ve yoksullaşmaya da devam ediyoruz.
aids. Of course, we are all
Bunu
poor, and
söyleyeyim.
we are getting poorer and poorer every day.
Hep unutuyorum sesi açmayı.
I always forget to unmute myself. Thank you. There is no more question.
Ama sizin eklemek istedikleriniz
Maybe you may
beşer dakika daha verebiliriz.
add a few words because we have time, and then I will give floor to you, Professor Şebnem. Maybe just one point. Bayram Sokak case, the sex workers, trans women sex workers, their houses were raided once or twice in a month, and they were arrested, and following the second raid, the street was closed and 9 women lost their jobs. So the lockdown makes an impact, a direct impact on these people. And there are groups, the LGBTI or LGBTI plus sex workers or both, or there is an attempt to make these people to pay price. That's one point. The second point is that on the one hand, the LGBTI plus movement has close relations with many trade unions, including the Turkish Medical Association, and of course there has been a positive change, which is a clear fact. But we are under an enormous attack, and in the past there were some issues that were deemed as mistakes, but now it is considered a censorship. So we are not in a period that we can discuss what is an LGBTI person or what is that concept, because there are very detailed and deep there are well-detailed plays and also games on us, and this type of mistakes from the chamber organizations may make such impact on us. Of course, I'm not comparing the organization with the Ministry of Trade. For example, just 1 month before the Bosphorus University protest, which was attacked under the name of LGBTI, and the pride flag, and the the Minister of Commerce signed this
Ben de
document and decision.
pardon.
saying
Ben de
that
şunu
it is
söyleyebilirim. Yani
LGBT
sadece
issue.
bu
I
bir
also would like to say
gelir yoksunluğu değil.
it is not
Derin
about lack of
yoksulluk
income.
yaşayan insanların yaşadığı. Yani her türlü yoksulluk aslında. Yani
It's
sosyal
about
hayattan
lack of.
uzaklaşma, aslında bu
It is
yoksulluğun
about
içerisinde
being
sosyal
isolated from
dışlanma,
social life and also
hep böyle
social
onlar ve
exclusion.
bizler.
It is
İnanılmaz bir
always us
hani
and
pandemide
them.
de dip derin bir o eşitsizlik aslında ortaya çıktı. Mesela işte şunları fark ettim.
This
Yani
deep
ben kendim de
inequality has
utandım
become more
ama
visible
öğrendim,
under the
öğrenmeye
pandemic.
de devam
I
ediyorum.
also
Yani
learned a
neden
lot.
işte kadın hareketinde daha az
For
tartışılıyor
example,
kadın yoksulluğu?
why
Neden çocuk hareketinde
there is not enough
çocuk
discussion about women
yoksulluğu
inequalities in the
daha az
women
tartışılıyor?
movement,
Yani engelli yoksulluğu.
and
Yani bu yoksulluk
why we
aslında
do
her
not
şeyi, her birey,
discuss
yaşlıların
these
yoksulluğu, her şeyi
inequalities for
kapsayan bir
disabled
şey.
people, for
Çünkü bu aynı
older
zamanda
people, because
hani
it
gerçekten sosyal
covers this,
izolasyon
poverty
gibi,
covers everything.
sosyal
It's like
dışlanma
social
gibi
isolation
ve
and social exclusion.
yani bu yukarıda kim varsa bu fark etmiyor. Yani işte bu kamu
Because
olabilir, belediyeler olabilir.
no matter
O
who
yönetimdeki
is
herkes içinde
occupying the
kurduğu bir
office
ilişki var.
or
Yani
power,
itaat
it
biat
makes
ilişkisi.
no
Hep böyle işte
difference. There is
yarı
always
aç
a
yarı tok
relation,
tutma. Hep
power
böyle bir
and
muhtaçlık
obedience,
ilişkisi
and
kurulmuş. Yani
there is
hani
a
bizim
relation that
tartışmamız
you depend
gereken
on
şey şu.
people. What we need to discuss
Özgürlüğe elde etmesi gerekiyor bu
is
insanların.
that these
Yani
people
özgür olması gerekiyor. Bir
should be able to
partiye,
achieve
bir
freedom.
kuruma
They should be
bağımlılık değil.
free
Yani
from
kendilerini herhangi bir kuruma, bir devlet kurumuna
being dependent
gittikleri
on
zaman
any
özgürce,
organization,
yani
any
o
public
aldıkları şeyin
institute.
bir hak
So
olduğunu,
they should
bir ya da bizim
fully know
diyoruz
that
ya biz
it is their
hayırseverlik
right.
yapmıyoruz diye üstüne basa basa
So
söylüyoruz. Çünkü
we are
diyoruz ki
saying that it is
o bebeğin hakkı, yani hak temelli bakmak
something
gerektiğini.
that
Bunu
we are
hem sivil
giving
toplumun hem
from our
kamu
pocket. It
kurumlarının
is a right that we provide
yani
these,
yoksullar özgür değil, onu söyleyebilirim. Derin yoksulluk yaşayan insanlar aslında
because
özgür değiller yani. Düşünceleriyle, hayatlarıyla yaşama
poor
biçimleriyle
people
bunu
are not
söylüyorum.
free. What I can
Teşekkür
say, because when we provide these diapers to babies, it is not something that we provide it from our own pocket. It is their right. Thank you all. I would like to thank Remzi for being the moderator and also for his opening remarks. You shed light on a very important aspect, and I know Hajar and for her efforts, and also I would like to thank Yıldız for their contribution and also the criticisms. That's what we have been trying to do. That is the objective of this session. We aim to define and make visible those who are invisible. Of course, we will discuss inequalities in the upcoming sessions, and we will have a forum in our session that we will discuss what to do. And I think we should be there to share our dreams about the future. Regarding the and regarding your criticism, we were quite new in the issue, and regarding this rainbow, we were thinking and trying to understand why we were in that committee. And we received the following information. There is no decision that the Turkish Medical Association signed. And when I say the decision, it is about putting the rainbow into a package. That's what I received from my colleague. Of course, all these type of cases and issues require transparency. And when we try to exercise our right to information, we have difficulties. As regards to the discrimination, for example, since you raised the issue of discrimination on the basis of age, which is very important, which we focus a lot because it ignores people. the fact, and the syndrome of Peter Pan is very significant because it left people alone, and we left people to be unhealthy. They were not able to move, they were not able to exercise. Of course, the deepest discrimination is observed in the case of the LGBTI plus people. You are fully right, Yıldız, as you gave the example of Titanic. And we see this issue also in the health sector. We as the Turkish Medical Association, as our chamber organization, and also our chambers across the provinces, if there is any allegation of discrimination, we are responsible and obliged to investigate into such accusations. If there is any accusation, we always remind our ethic principles. Of course, it is not enough, because the society relies on discrimination, and there are people who are, of course, benefit from this discrimination. There is need for more comprehensive response to these inequalities, to these invisibles, so that they become visible. And we need to work harder. We need to work together, because all these people, all these individuals should be able to apply to the chamber organizations. And for that purpose, there is need for an atmosphere that these people will not have to hide their identities. And there are serious problems in access to right to health and also health services. We know that there are not official and professional health services which are performed in an atmosphere which is not appropriate. In this respect, we have responsibilities. But your advocacy activities are extremely important. The solidarity activities are important. Of course, it is tiring, because the conditions have worsened, and it is not easy to survive under these circumstances. But thanks a lot for raising these issues and sharing your experience with us, and thanks for accepting our invitation. Thanks for being with us. Dear Yıldız, we are trying to get more details about the point that you raised, and we will get back to you whenever we receive a response. Thanks a lot, and we will also send you the response to the parliamentary question. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Şebnem. Hope that our session responded to some points. In the beginning of the pandemic, there was a saying that we are all depending on each other. We are all interdependent. And there is need for strengthening these solidarity networks. There is need for building and creating new links, new ties. It is extremely important to have new political ties. And I think this symposium, which is being organized on the occasion of the first anniversary of the pandemic for human nature and health. And I am of the opinion that this symposium is one of the platforms to discuss all these issues, to create links and ties. I would like to thank Yıldız, and also I would like to thank Hacer Fogo for their contributions. I would like to thank our audience for being with us at this time at night. Thank you all, and have a nice evening. We also would like to thank our interpreters. Yes, apologies, and no need to make them invisible, and I apologize if I speak fast.